Thank you for the opportunity to share some strategies and tactics in influencing negotiations. As a little bit of background, I've been practicing law for over 20 years in multiple jurisdictions. Started my practice in Las Vegas, Nevada several years ago, and I've been in Central Florida for a long time. I'm an attorney. I've been involved in litigation. I've done transactional work, and I've been a certified mediator for the past few years, and that comprises a significant portion of my practice. And a lot of what I'm going to share with you today are things that I've learned and tried to flesh out and develop over the course of my practice, particularly when I'm involved in mediations. As it so happens, I've had a mediation every day this week, and we're on a break from one today, so I can join you. So I appreciate that opportunity. I'm going to pop in here to the agenda, and we'll jump into the material. Shared a few handouts in addition to the slides. You can take some notes. Hopefully some of this material will be helpful for you and get you to focus what I think is on what really moves tough negotiations. And it all derives from not from what parties have to gain in a negotiation or in a mediation, any type of situation where you're trying to influence, but it's really from a standpoint of loss aversion. And that's what forms the basis for a theory that I've been developing. In fact, I'm working on a book on this as we speak that I hope to have done this fall. And it's what I call a RECO mindset or a RECO strategy, and RECO, R-E-C-O, and that stands for realistic expectation of a catastrophic outcome. It's focusing when you're involved in entangled litigation or entangled negotiations, focusing on what you stand to lose. Oftentimes people naturally want to focus on the upside of what they can gain in some type of situation, in conflict or in negotiation. BATNA, of course, is important, best alternative to a negotiated arrangement. Anybody who's ever taken a negotiation course is quite familiar with that term, or even if you've just listened to a video or a podcast or read a book. Of course, BATNA is important. You need to know what your walkaway is, but BATNA applies well in certain situations. In tough, entangled, complicated situations, oftentimes it's not enough to know your BATNA. You need to know what do you stand to lose so you know what your better walkaway is today. So we'll talk about RECO as a strategy, and then we'll talk about some tactics on how to get there. This will be everything from influence tactics and some ways that you can build rapport, build empathy, ask questions, and obtain information that you can use to move negotiations. We'll talk about the RECO process and how you use those tactics that we talk about in part 2 into applying the process in part 3. Then we'll talk about a few examples. I'm going to have some interactive exercises along the way because I know even though I'm just talking, I'll be fielding questions, and I welcome those questions both during the seminar and after. So if you have a question, you can pop it in there and I'll address it. If for some reason I don't get to your question, or if you don't think of it during the seminar, I welcome follow-up afterwards, and my contact information will be made available to you. So jumping into part 1, what I like to start with here is again, as I mentioned in the beginning, shifting our focus from a BATNA upside, what's our best day look like? And of course, that's important, to taking, and I'm not talking about the worst day possible. I'm talking about what's a realistic bad outcome look like, realistic expectation of a catastrophic outcome. And we're going to try and put that in focus. And we're going to, and in order to apply what I'm going to talk about today, we really need to make that real. And we'll talk about ways, what can we do? How can we build rapport with our negotiating counterparts or with parties that are entrenched in positions to make them understand, help them come to a realization of what that potential outcome looks like. And anytime we go into a negotiation, you're taught to, prepare all your solid points. Attorneys can be great advocates, and many that I work with are very, very effective at advocating for their position, for their parties. How do we get the parties to look at the other side of the coin? And so I think that the best negotiations aren't about winning points. It's about making the other side realize that they really can't afford to lose, and you need to figure out an alternative method or an alternative exit plan, or what I like to look at is using using negotiation tactics and strategies as a way to get your best off ramp from a difficult situation. The RICO strategy is grounded in a fundamental truth, which has been proven in behavioral psychology and behavioral economics, and that is that the power of fear is at least twice as strong as the power of gain. If you think about it, and I'll give you some examples, but imagine that you are walking down the street and you find $20 on the sidewalk. You go home and it's kind of an exciting thing. You just found some cash laid out. You look around, nobody seems to be claiming the cash. You're not going to leave it laying there. All right, you found a free $20. Now imagine what it feels like if you're walking down the street, you find $20 and it's two $10 bills, and you go home and you tell your significant other, your kids, or somebody else, hey, I found this cash, and you go to pull it out of your pocket. There's only 10 there instead of 20. Now, how do you feel? What's interesting is a lot of folks focus more on the fact of what they lost than their gain. And I'll give you some other examples as we go along. But the idea is that losses feel more painful than gains feel good. And when we talk about coming up with a strategy, how to apply this, we're not talking about inventing, again, fictional boogie monsters. We're talking about identifying the real actual risks. Oftentimes, if we're talking about lawsuits and litigation, these are the costs. These are what I call the conflict tax in any legal dispute. It's the money you're going to spend on legal. It's the money you're going to spend on costs, expert witnesses, the time, the distraction. What's this going to do to your business? What's it going to do to your reputation in some circumstances? Is this going to be years of tying up resources, personnel to deal with issues? And then what's the emotional toll? A lot of disputes, even business disputes. I've been in a large law firm. I'm in a smaller firm now, and I have my own mediation practice, and I work with people across the board. A lot of times the folks that I'm dealing directly with, these are business owners, are the folks that are writing the check. If you run a small business and you're the guy writing the check, being involved in any litigation that threatens your business, threatens your livelihood, is very, very stressful. And what's the toll, what's the cost of all of that when you put it all together? Now, the reason that I have been using this is that the studies, or the reason I apply this loss aversion method, is that the studies over and over bear out the truth, and I've actually seen it in action. So I gave you the example of the finding $20 on the street and losing 10. Another example, and this was actually shown by economists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They wrote a book about this. There's actually a book about their book that was written by Michael Lewis, I think, on how they developed the idea of prospect theory. Prospect theory is all based on loss aversion. It's the idea that people put a different focus and a different emphasis, and they feel loss more than gains. And they've shown this in various studies. I'm going to give you another example. I use the finding a dollar bill or finding a $20 bill example. Here's another one. This was a study that was actually done where they would send out cards and or put people into a scenario where you receive the card that said that if you return this card, this rebate card, you get $20. Then they create the same scenario, but instead of you get $20, they create a scenario where people had a discount that was applicable unless they returned the card. So in other words, if you don't return the card, you lose $20. And they found that the response rate, when you framed it in a loss frame, you'll lose $20 versus a gain of $20. The response rate was significantly higher. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's 75% of the people respond to the loss frame, where only 20% or 25% respond to the gain frame. Think about it yourself. If you get if you buy something and you have a potential rebate, how many people really take the time to fill that out and send in a rebate? But if you get something in the mail that says if you don't pay this, you're going to have a $10 or $20 fine, or there's an interest charge. People I know for me and my wife, we're pretty fanatical about paying credit card bills to make sure that no fees and interest accrue. People will go out of their way to avoid a 3% credit card fee or an ACH fee or something else. Yet, taking the same time to gain a $20 rebate, you don't put that time into it. So think about this in your own life and think if these examples actually hit home, and I think you'll find that they really do apply in multiple scenarios. So we're going to test it out. This is my audience participation interaction part one. I'd like you to take out, if you would, a little piece of paper or make a note of something, because I think it's really fun to see the results. I'm going to give you a scenario here and ask for you to pick one of the programs that's available in the scenario. And this actually, I started using this back around 2020, 2021. It was interesting, in light of what we were going through, but it still applies. And this is a psychology study that was done, and the results are phenomenal. In this scenario, imagine a disease outbreak that's expected to kill 600 people in a local community. Now, you're given two options of a program that you can pursue. In the first program, program A, the guarantee here is that of those 600, 200 will be saved. Program B, there's a 1/3 probability that 600 will be saved and a 2/3 probability that nobody will be saved. So I want you to take a moment, think about those programs, and think about which one you would choose, program A or program B. Write it down or make a mental note of it. All right, here's the second one. Now you have the same scenario. 600 people are going to be affected by this disease in a local community. And program C, you have a guarantee that 400 people will die. Program C, 400 people will die. Program D, a 1/3 probability that no one will die, and 2/3 probability that 600 will die. 1/3 probability no one will die. Program C, 400 will die. So write down which one you pick. Again, this one, I want you to pick program C or program D. Take a moment and pick that. The results of this were fascinating. And what the study showed is that how choices are framed and phrased or framed impacts the decision even when the outcomes are identical. Look at these two studies. The first one was a gain frame. I mentioned this earlier. Whether you frame something as gain or loss. First one in a gain frame, if program A is adopted, 200 people are saved. And 72% picked program A when given those two choices between A and B. So which did you pick? Did you pick A or did you pick B? In the second, it's the same situation. You have either 200 people guaranteed saved or 400 people guaranteed they will die. The numbers are the same. It was the framing that was different. And in the second scenario, between program C and program D, 78% chose program D. In other words, in the first scenario, in a gain frame, people held on to the sure thing. 72%, almost 3/4 held on to the guarantee that 200 people will be saved. So when given the option of a guaranteed upside, people chose the upside rather than take the risk that there's a certain percentage, 1/3 or 2/3, that won't survive. When it's framed as a potential loss, you just, instead of saying 200 people will be saved, 400 will die, the result was flipped, and over 3/4 chose to take a gamble in order to avoid the loss, avoid the guaranteed loss of 400 dying. Same numbers, different framing, different results. And that should inform how we approach negotiations. When you go into a tough and tangled negotiation, when I'm in a mediation, I focus much less on what people stand to gain than what they stand to lose. You can apply this in daily life and exercises. I'll give you something that you can do just in practice. Think of yourself of a real world idea right now that you want to sell. Think of maybe it's a vacation you want to take with your family. Now, you can talk about, sit at the dinner table. Try this. Just figure out something. You want your kid to do their homework, or clean their room. So I'm going to use the vacation idea. You want to take a vacation and you want to start making the plans. You realize that, if you're winter, you want to go skiing for the winter, and you know the places are going to book up and sell out. You need to make plans. You can talk to your family about, hey, we ought to pick such and such a place, you know, whatever that is. We ought to pick this ski place. It looks beautiful. It doesn't get too crowded. The cost is reasonable. Look at the mountains. It's got great skiing. It's got great reviews, etc. Now, what type of response do you get? Okay, sounds good, but there's no sense of urgency. Now, take that same scenario and flip it and talk that, you know, bring it up a day or two later. Make a note to yourself. If you want to try this out and have fun for yourself, make a note. Now sit down and say, hey, I'm afraid if we don't book a place soon, we're going to lose out. We're not going to be able to get a place that we want, and we're going to get second tier, or we're not going to be able to get reservations. We're going to stay in a crappy room. Think about all the negatives that can happen if you don't take action. You want a simpler example? I'm going to give you, and I know I want to be conscious of our time here, but you want a simpler example? You're trying to get your kid to clean their room. So you say, hey, if you clean your room, it's going to be nice and organized. You're in a clean space. You know, be much, you know, you're going to have a much more conducive environment to things that you want to do. Plus, I'll reward you with cookies, and I'll give you a treat or pay your allowance or something else. However you traditionally get your child or somebody to do something. Now flip that again, if they don't respond, and maybe they don't, and if you have kids like mine, I love my kids, 12 and 8, but I get a situation where I get to blow off. Now you flip it and you say, hey, the rule is you got to have your room cleaned if you want to go out and do, you know, X this weekend. I'm afraid that if you don't get your room cleaned, we're not going to be in a position to go do that because we're going to have to spend the time that we would use having fun cleaning your room. You could do it homework. I'm afraid if you don't get your homework done, you're gonna be stuck later tonight, and you're not gonna be able to go out and play with your friends and do stuff that you want to do. And if you end up getting a bad grade, then you know that's gonna have repercussions. You may end up having to get extra study time, and you lose out on benefits. Loss framing versus gain framing. All right, now that I've driven home loss frame versus gain frame, this is something I believe heavily in because I've seen it in action. So now we're going to talk about, you know, how to apply that strategy. BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated arrangement, applies very well in transactional type deals. If you're going to buy a car and you don't like the deal, you walk away, you go to a different dealership and you shop somewhere else for the car. If you're trying to book a room at one hotel and you don't like the deal, you go to a different hotel. No big deal. If you don't like one restaurant, you go somewhere else. Not every deal works well for BATNA. What if you're mediating a divorce? What if you're mediating a business divorce? You got partners that are entangled with each other. They can't just walk away. If you have a dispute with a business partner and you have fundamental disagreements and there's a lack of trust and other problems that tend to develop, or if it's an inheritance dispute, an estate issue, a divorce, the answer isn't just walk away. Your best alternative to a negotiated arrangement is years, likely, of protracted litigation with all kinds of bad potential outcomes. And walking folks through what those outcomes look like, making it real, and creating that realistic expectation of, okay, what if everything doesn't go your way? What does that look like? And painting that picture, that's what I'm talking about. That's the other side of the coin from BATNA. You have BATNA and you have RICO. So I like to look at this not as one or the other, but of two sides of the same coin. And to apply it well, you have to be able to identify the types of situations, the types of negotiations that you're involved in, because sometimes BATNA does work. If you're shopping for a car, maybe the BATNA will work. Lately, I saw a vehicle I've been into. I want a little RV, a Class B RV that I could travel around, work. I could do my mediation seminars from the road and do some traveling. It's a commodity. I'll find what I want. If I don't like the deal, I go somewhere else. I'll bring this up again when we talk about other influence tactics later and the experience that I recently had. But for now, I want to walk you through an exercise. See, again, you can sort of write these down. Some of these are kind of obvious, but I want you to participate. So take out a piece of paper again, or the paper you had from earlier, and let's look at this, do a quick evaluation. What type of negotiation? Are you in an entangled negotiation, or are you on a transactional style negotiation? So you're buying a new office printer. This one's kind of a layup, right? If you don't like the deal, you go somewhere else, unless there's only one seller in town. So you're in a transactional negotiation. If you're separating from a partner, business partner, life partner, romantic partner, you're in an entangled deal. A baton is not going to work. Hiring a new staff member. This one's gray area. Likely it's a transactional type arrangement. If you don't like one person, you hire someone else. But if you're hiring for a key position and you're negotiating and you've got somebody you really like, it could turn into something where you really don't want to separate from that person. So it has a little bit of gray area, similar as terminating a key staff member. Yeah, terminating, you look at your BATNA and your BATNA is, okay, I stick around with this person or I terminate them. But if you have a key member of your team, maybe it's not that easy to terminate them because they have certain relationships, they have a certain history, they have a certain skill set that's difficult to replace. So we're getting a little bit of a gray area and more of an entangled type situation. If you're booking a hotel venue for a one-day event, pretty straightforward. That's a transactional deal. And of course, if you're dividing inherited assets, you're in a entangled conflict. And I would submit to you that when you're in an entangled conflict, BATNA is not enough. And the tactics and strategies we're talking about today are going to help get you over the hurdle. So once we have the strategy, the RICO strategy that we're going to apply, loss aversion, making the potential catastrophic outcome real and making it feel real, how do we drive that home? What tactics do we use to get there? So RICO is the strategy, and we're going to talk about a few tactics to get us there. First one, what I like to use particularly in mediations or when dealing with new clients or when negotiating with other parties in the early stages of a negotiation are interrogatory style questions. And the idea here is that you want to be, you don't want to lecture. You want to be a guide. You want to ask questions and you want to let other folks, your counterparts in a negotiation, or if I look at a lot of these from the standpoint of mediation, I want the other parties to come to the realization that I already see, the path that I already see. I want to lead them along the way. How am I going to do that? I'm going to ask them questions like, what is it you hope to accomplish? How do you expect to get there? How do you expect the other side to agree to your position? Asking questions that begin with how and what. And I will, again, submit to you that if you get in negotiations, and again, I'm going to give you some low risk examples here and some low stakes examples. Try this with friends and family. Try this with kids or your spouse or partner or business partner and employee. Try to avoid asking simple yes and no questions. Try to avoid questions that start with why. Chris Voss, he wrote the book Getting to Yes. Great, fantastic book. I've listened and read it a couple times. He calls these interrogatory questions calibrated questions, calibrating them to bring them to the position where you want people to land. And he says that why is accusatory, and I tend to agree. And I know this from experience. If you can just make this one tweak in your negotiating style, if there's any other mediators out there, instead of asking, why is that proposal reasonable? Why is that reasonable? I have a habit of using what and how. Why is that right? Why do you want this? Why do you say that? Get away from why. When you're dealing with, I love using kids as an example, talking to your kids. Why did you do that? Why do you think that is fair? Why do you want to do that? Change it and change these to what and how questions. And just notice the different response you get from people just going from why and striking that from your verbiage to how and what. Instead of asking, why is this reasonable? Or why is that, somebody tells you, okay, I want this. Why is that reasonable? Change it to what makes that a reasonable proposal? Or switch it up a little bit more. What makes that a reasonable proposal? And how can I present that to the other side to make them think it's reasonable? So these are the types of questions that, the way I want you to ask questions. If you learn this tactic alone, if you take nothing away from today and you just stop using why in your negotiations, and if you want to build rapport and open up conversations and use what and how, you will notice a difference in the way you're able to communicate with folks. So I'm going to give you a drill. This is a little practice you can do at home. Pick a very low stakes disagreement. My brother thinks that Theodore Roosevelt is the greatest president of all time, and I think that Franklin Roosevelt is the greatest president of all time, right? I'm trying to use something that's very low, low pressure, low stakes, isn't going to get anybody all fired up. Take some type of disagreement that you have with somebody, a very low stakes disagreement, and ask them about it using only how and what questions. Don't ask them why, and don't give your own position. Your single objective here is to understand their perspective, asking them what makes them think that, what makes them feel that way, what makes them say it, how do they support it, how do they feel about it, how do they think other people think about it. Use only how and what questions. Just take a little bit of practice, but you could do this with the kids when your kids takes the car out on the weekend. All right, what makes you think I should trust you with the car? How are you going to treat the car? What are you going to do? What time are you going to be home? All types of ways you can ask these questions without using why. But in any type of disagreement, just ask the questions this way. Then here's the big challenge. Just once you feel like you understand it completely, don't give your opinion. Just stop and stop talking. Irving Younger does the 10 Commandments of cross-examination. Your old law school professor. I had a class with his wife years ago at University of Minnesota, and he talks about doing cross-examination and getting to a certain point and just stop talking. Try this tactic at home. Try this one tactic. Ask how and why questions to your kids, to your spouse, to someone else, and notice how it changes the dynamic of the conversation. Don't posit your own opinion. Just ask them and continue to ask them questions until you've run out of questions to ask. I guarantee this will have an impact on the way you communicate if you really give it a shot. Here's tool number 2, forced empathy. This is something, again, that comes from there's a book. Gosh, I take stuff from a lot of books. So a lot of these ideas aren't mine alone. Voss calls this, I think, tactical empathy. There's another guy that wrote a book that says start with no. And in psychology, however, they call this forced empathy. And forced empathy is used to disarm resistance, build rapport, and that rapport that's necessary to build trust, build empathy. You don't have to agree with someone's position, but before you can influence someone, you need to get that person to a point where they trust you, and they're not going to trust you if they don't think you understand. And the way you can do this very in simple terms is use verbal mirroring, which is just repeating the last couple words that somebody says. Like somebody says, I didn't sign that contract. Say, you didn't sign that contract. And then you can tweak emphasis on it. They say, I didn't sign that contract. You didn't sign that contract? Or you didn't sign that contract? Or you didn't sign that contract? There's different ways you can use emphasis, but you're just taking the last couple words and you're mirroring that back. It may not be exact, but it's going to be similar. If someone says to you, you start off, you see somebody, you can practice this in the grocery store. It seems like you're having a great day today, and they look at you and say, I'm not having a great day. So you're not having a great day. You're mirroring. All you're doing and using the seems like or sounds like or looks like. This is just labeling emotions, labeling things that you observe naturally. Just trying these little tactics with folks to build rapport, to build empathy. I did a seminar a year or two ago with a very effective trainer and hostage negotiator from in Central Florida. He trains other negotiation teams. He's a former SWAT team guy, and he gave me the idea. This is a lot of fun to try. You're out and about and ask somebody, say, hey, instead of just saying, how are you today? Say, how's your day going? And they say, good day. And I'll respond and say, on a scale of, 1 to 10, how good? Is it a 7 good or is it a 10 good? And then they'll answer. Then you could take that and say, okay, what makes it? And you can start with your how and what questions. What makes it a 10? What would make it a 10 if you're only an 8? Or if they seem happy, right? It seems like you're excited about that. It seems like you're not having a good day. You can use the labeling. You can use the mirroring, sprinkle in some how and some what. Learn to build rapport with people, and you can do this in very low stakes. You can do it in restaurants. You sit in, at the grocery store. If you're standing in line at the post office or somewhere else, wherever people stand in line, I try to avoid them. So here's another tactic. So we're going to take the second tactic. I'm going to give you another low stakes exercise. Go to your next large gathering. I love these at networking events or at holiday parties. I once did this a couple of years ago at a Halloween party with my wife, and it was fascinating. She was watching me because I told her what I was going to do. And it was the first time I did it. It was about 3 years ago at a Halloween party. I went out. I didn't have anything to drink, which is very unusual. Years ago, I would get super nervous, and I'd go to these events, and I need to have a drink in order, for social lubrication. Now I go to networking or I go to fundraising functions, galas, and I very, very rarely, and I'll have a drink when I'm home, but I very rarely drink at these events because I want to keep my head clear. And it's fascinating seeing the response you get from folks. And so go to one of these gatherings and just try mirroring and labeling for the entire evening. Don't give your opinion. Don't, offer anything of your own, unless you're asked, you can a little bit, and just try, looking at folks. It seems like you're having a good night. And when they respond, they say yes. And it gives you a little bit of safety, right? If you say, seems like you're having a good night, and they say no, say, oh, well, what would make it a better night? Or what makes you say that? Try to avoid why and use the how. Or if they say, if they question why you would say that, you can just you can follow with a label, follow with a mirror off what they say. What makes you say that? Say that, and they'll take your labeling and they will continue the conversation. If you practice it, it feels a little bit awkward at the beginning. And of course, I don't have an opportunity to do it right now with somebody. But if you just take this little tactic and you apply that in a very low stakes environment, you'll get used to doing it more and more, and you'll see how natural it is. You'll be amazed at going to these events, how you're able to build rapport. Going back to the Halloween party a couple of years ago, by the end of the evening, I had somebody who was at the party mention something to my wife about how warm how I was so warm and welcoming, and they enjoyed talking to me, and with all of these compliments that I wasn't asking for. And I think it was just the fact that the language and the communication that I was using was conveying a deep sense of empathy, even though I didn't express any of my own opinions. And now I do that all the time. All right. Third tactic here are persuasion principles. These come right from Robert Cialdini. He's the original author. I think some of these tactics have been around forever. You can pull some stuff off of the slides here. The principles of persuasion from Cialdini. Some of these are obvious when you hear them, but if you actually apply them in your negotiations, you'll be shocked how effective they are if you actively think about them and figure out where to apply them. Reciprocity, the reciprocity principle has been demonstrated over and over again. If you give somebody something, they feel an urge to give you something back. If you're in a negotiation, if you're going to give up something, try to get hey, we're going to concede on this point, but we'd like you to give us this. If you're negotiating a contract, we're going to concede on the number you want. What we'd like in return is, so what you're doing is you're taking the reciprocity principle, you're labeling the reciprocity, and you're presenting an expectation that you're going to get something in return. You can either label that and describe what it is, or just see what you get in return. It works often. Commitment and consistency. When I'm involved in disputes, when I'm mediating disputes where people start talking about their kids, I will go into a little bit of forced empathy and some labeling on the kids. It seems like your kids are everything to you. It seems like it's very important. It seems like the safety and well-being of your kids and your love for your kids it seems like you'd do anything for them. And then later, we oftentimes, when you can apply commitment and consistency, they've already talked about how important their kids are. Now, if there's some horrendous lawsuit that they're involved in, it could potentially affect them, even by taking time away, put them on a trial calendar so they miss Christmas this year. How's it going to feel if you are on a 3-week trial docket in December and you don't get to spend time with your kids during the holidays because you're stuck at the court's beck and call? How's it going to feel if you have to cancel vacation? Questions like that, and you get a commitment to folks, and then you get them to make decisions. I just had a mediation where we did this, where there was a property in dispute, and we realized, we started early with, seems like it's important for you to make sure your kids have a safe place to live and that you have a good home for them. What's going to happen if you lose this lawsuit? You lose the home. How are you going to make up for that? What kind of effect is that going to have on your kids? Earlier, you committed to the notion that your kids were most important. Forget about principle, forget about how you might win your case. If your kids are most important, how can you be consistent with that notion? People will naturally fall into a consistency with earlier commitments. Social proof, I use this in every mediation I do. I do a little bit of opening. And in the opening, I tell folks that most mediations, if people want to settle, they settle. About 80% settle on cases of people who want to settle. Social proof is just saying, hey, other people do this. This is Amazon reviews. You can apply that just like I do. Hey, most people do this. What do you think? Liking, we're more influenced by people that we like. That's building rapport, building empathy. It gives you a better position from which to influence. Authority, I started that off today with our session. Told you I've been doing this for a while. My certifications, background, demonstrate authority. Scarcity, this comes back to the vehicle. I was shopping for this Class B RV, and I was hemming and hawing. I was looking at one I kind of liked, and I went back and I was going to show my wife, and it was gone. I suddenly felt a sense of loss. This is almost comical because I can realize that on a psychological level, I could step outside and realize that it's totally irrational, that I wasn't sure I even wanted to buy this thing. But once it was gone and I had it in my mind, I had that sense of loss and the sense of scarcity, and I was all bummed out about it. I actually sent somebody a message and said, oh, the thing was gone. I was ready to buy it. We have that all the time. Scarcity. If you have less of something available, you tend to value it more. I want to talk about here, did I skip a slide? Pardon me here. Okay. All right, I want to give you a little historical demonstration. I've got some time here and talk about RICO and loss aversion and loss framing from a historical standpoint. And this goes back to, there's a book written about this. Candidly, I haven't read the entire book, but I've read about this some. And it's Lincoln during during the Civil War, and how he put together what was called a team of rivals and his perspective, and contrast that with like Napoleon at Waterloo. I like history. I'm sprinkling some of this into my book that I'm working on. Napoleon famously tried to motivate people by through glory, and had generals, and think of all the lands we'll conquer and the glory that will be in your name, and it ended up a failure. Lincoln approached it from a different standpoint. Lincoln put together a group of political rivals, some who really did not like each other, and he was able to motivate them all by discussing, focusing on framing their goals not as creating a new country, not as winning a war, but as potentially losing grip on the country, or losing a country, losing not only political power, but losing the country, losing the Union during the Civil War. He had to deal with William Seward. Seward was actually a front runner for the political nomination when Lincoln ran, and initially did not have much respect for Lincoln. And he once drafted a letter to Lincoln about Lincoln, suggesting that he had no policy experience and he should let Seward actually run the government. He had Salmon Chase as Treasury Secretary, and it's pretty well known that Chase didn't like Lincoln, didn't have much respect for him. Chase, again, had eyes on the presidency, but Lincoln knew that he needed him because he needed his financial genius in order to fund the war. He regularly complained about Lincoln being weak. You had Edward Bates was the Attorney General. He also competed for the 1860 nomination with Lincoln, and Bates didn't like Chase. So you had people in the cabinet that didn't like each other. And so you had this interconnected web of individuals who didn't like each other. But Lincoln took these individuals, this team. So you can apply this RICO concept not only in the negotiations, but in leadership and in business. Lincoln took all these men who didn't like each other and who didn't trust him and had competed with him and didn't think highly of them. But he forced them to look out over the edge of the cliff. What happens if we fail? What happens if the Union fails? What does this look like? It's that fear of catastrophic loss that he was able to channel and use in order to get people to think further beyond themselves, and very powerful. All right, let's jump back in a little bit more tools. Tool number 4, this is your neutralizing hardball tactics. So the idea here is that, and I've done a whole webinar, seminar just on hardball tactics. I've given you a handout so you can see some effective countermeasures against some of these tactics. I put a few here on the slides. A favorite is, whenever there's an extreme anchor, I see this again all the time in mediation. So I ask people, it's amazing how often people don't come to a mediation and know what they want when they get there, or have thought about what they realistically want to ask for. I'll say, okay, well, what's the goal? What looks like a home run for you? What do you want to get out of this process today? Those sometimes are two different things. A home run is one thing. What they want to get out of it might be a little bit more measured. But I'll ask, where do you want to start? Let's just take say I'm not, I don't like doing, I like more complex mediations, but a case where somebody's just trying to get money from somebody else. It's $100,000 claim. It's an insurance claim. And they say, well, we want $100,000. So, and if you're directly negotiating with somebody and they take an extreme anchor, the response can simply be, how am I supposed to do that? I'm stealing that from Voss too. How am I supposed to get them to commit to that? What tools are you going to give me? What information are you going to give me that's going to get me there? Go to your how and what questions. What makes that a reasonable offer? Not only what makes it a reasonable offer, but how do I go present that to the other side? How do I go present that to my client? How do I go back and present that to my team? How am I supposed to accept that? How am I supposed to trust you to do business in the future if we're negotiating face to face? If I know that when I ask you what the deal should be, it's all for you and none for me. So a good response is just a good how or what question. Countering personal threats when people threaten you in litigation. I'm going to bury you. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I like a label there. Seems like you're under a lot of pressure. Seems like you're under a lot of stress. Seems like this might be difficult for you. Seems like it might be tough for us to do a deal. I've said in mediations, seems like you don't want to get this case settled. Seems like you'd like to focus on something else. Sounds like this is going to be tough to get this done. Just a simple label. So if you look at and I've got a separate page for you, you'll see I've got countermeasures on here for take it or leave it offers, extreme anchoring, good cop, bad cop. Go ahead and look at those. If you have any questions, these are simple things that will give you some ideas on how to respond to these extreme to extreme offers, to unreasonable positions. Things like the red herring, where somebody creates fake issues. You can test these out with calibrated questions. Say, if we resolve these other points, what makes that point important? And somebody throws out an issue, and you know that it's not an important issue. You could respond with something like, if we resolve that issue, are we able to move on to these other ones with more favorable terms for me? Things of that nature. So I will let you look at that. And one other thing I want to point out, if you're going into an intense negotiation, something else I'd focus on especially if you're going in with somebody that's known for being I would say the way I look at a hardball negotiator is somebody who's prepared and somebody who I know is very confident in their position, understands their weaknesses, and has already assessed those properly and is willing to give them due respect, but still move forward on their position. That to me is a tough hardball negotiator, not somebody who's impolite and screams and takes ridiculous positions. I just had to go through this recently with a client where I drafted a letter, and it's a letter where we're trying to gather some information, and they want me to take my niceties out of my letter, things that are courteous, like where I say please, or sign off respectfully, requesting certain things, and they think that the more hardball approach is to just be rude. That's not hardball, that's just amateur league. Hardball negotiations, in my view, are more sophisticated, but some tactics that you may come in contact with, you'll see on the sheet. And I would say, focus internally. Stuff I tell clients, you hear something you don't like, try not to respond. You don't have to respond. Take a moment, take a deep breath, count to 2, count to 3, count to 10, and wait and see if it even warrants a response. Control your mental response, and it will give you better control over your physical response. I call it maintaining your zen in negotiations. I try to sit down after I've gathered some information before a tough negotiation or in a mediation. I try to take 10 minutes. I'm a big napper and I meditate. Try to take 10 minutes and do either a nap or a yoga nidra, like a self-focus, where I close my eyes, clear my head, breathe, and go in with a clear head and clear mind. Doing that will help you in intense situations. If you got a call that's going to be difficult to make, consider doing that. Take a few minutes for yourself, for your own mental health, so you go in with a clear picture. It's more important, I think, to have a clear head to be able to listen to somebody on the other side, understand what someone else is saying, and then take that and use that as you provide your counterpoints, rather than just having a list of things that you've memorized to make your points without listening to the other side. Back to, all right, now we've talked about strategy. We've talked about some tactics to get you to the strategy. The strategy is RICO, realistic expectation of a catastrophic outcome, and making that real for the other side. We have some tactics that are going to help you build rapport, build empathy, gather information, figure out what's important to the other side, figure out what influence tactics you can use, commitment and consistency, authority. What are they going to respond to? Will they respond to the other side? What is going to be their trigger? Now we're going to take that, we'll put it into a complete plan. We're going to bring this full circle. You're going to go use your empathy, your labeling, your interrogatory style questions to make your counterpart, whoever that is you're talking to, make them test their own reality. What are going to be the costs to pursue this? What are they going to have to give up in terms of financial resources, other resources, time, personnel, emotional baggage, time away from family? What's important to them? What are they going to have to give up? Make it real, reality testing. Then we create leverage through loss. Get away from the gain frame. This is what we stand to gain through this. This is what we stand to lose and what you stand to lose if this doesn't, and this isn't threats. These are real things. Once you've identified the real costs, now we focus. Those are all the things that we know you're going to lose. These are all the things you might lose. We make it real, make the catastrophe real, make it visual for them, and now we need to give them an alternative. This is what Robert Urey and Fisher and Getting the Yes, they call building the golden bridge. I think Sun Tzu is another term. You build the golden bridge, you give them an alternative. You got to have something in mind. You want to give them a golden bridge to retreat across. Once they've looked over the cliff and they see all the negative, now we need to say, okay, how can we get you out of this? What's the alternative that we can build? Sometimes you work on that together. Sometimes you have some ideas in mind. You have to give folks a dignified path to retreat across. If somebody comes into a mediation entrenched in their position, that party and their attorney are not just going to walk away for nothing. It's not realistic. You have to give them some escape that makes sense. What I used to tell clients, what I told them in the past is, when you have somebody else right where you want them, don't try to rub their nose in it, because there's all kinds of tactics and stuff you can deal with, especially if you end up in a lawsuit. Either you end up in one because of this, or you're already in one. There's a lot of smart people out there practicing law, and smart tacticians that can take losing positions and make your life miserable. You see it on the battlefield. You see it in history. There's a lot of countries, there's a lot of armies that have been in losing positions that can still make life miserable for the other side. You probably have counterparts. You have a lot of authority over your employees, over your kids. They can still make things bad for you. You want to treat them with dignity, give them a way to take an alternative path, because they choose a path that's better than that realistic catastrophic outcome that you've painted for them. You give them certainty, give them closure, give them control, let them make the decision after looking over the cliff. And that's your path in a difficult negotiation to move folks out. Example I put here, another historical example, pretty famous, is during the Cuban Missile Crisis. There was no way that Kennedy was just going to get Khrushchev and the Soviets to agree to withdraw their position in Cuba just by threats. They were never going to threaten the Soviets out of Cuba. They had to give up something. So what did Kennedy give up? He gave up a position in Turkey. It was done quietly, but it allowed Khrushchev to withdraw. Famously, Khrushchev, supposedly, who knows what was going on the other side, but a lot of information suggests that Khrushchev was testing Kennedy because he didn't think he would stand up, didn't respect him, thought he could bully him. And there's that famous story about Khrushchev taking a shoe and banging it on the table at the UN, and he still had his shoes on. He brought the shoe as a prop. But Khrushchev was not going to back away unless Kennedy could give him something. I tell everybody in a negotiation, if you want to succeed in a mediation, we're going to have to give them something. And I'll ask people, what can we give them to make this work? How can we get the other side to go where you want to go? You don't have to come up with these ideas on your own, but you need to explore. How can maybe you're in a tough face-to-face negotiation. How can I get you to look at alternative options to move away from a lose-lose situation. All right, so I've got, I think I got about 10 minutes left. They don't want me to go over today. All right, here's another strategy example from history. I like a lot of these. So this is Microsoft Part 1 and Microsoft Part 2. In the first Microsoft case, this was from 98 to 2001. This is where Gates and Microsoft were first being sued by the federal government. Antitrust supposedly had to do with the Netscape browser, and they were forcing people into their own browser. It was killing Netscape. And the DOJ went after them, and they had proposed breaking up Microsoft. And Microsoft had taken some pretty extreme positions. Their attorney was famously, I think I flipped forward here. I apologize for that. Hold on. There we go. Microsoft had taken some pretty extreme positions. Gates apparently had taken some pretty extreme positions during his deposition. Gates had at one point asked, I think he questioned the meaning of certain words. He quibbled over what the meaning of compete and competition was. He suggested that early in the lawsuit, he suggested that Microsoft would never give up. They hadn't done anything wrong. They would fight forever. His attorney was oh my gosh, the attorney's name was a guy named John Warden, well-regarded litigator in antitrust. And in his opening at the trial, he essentially, his opening statement dismissed the government's case as a return of the Luddites. And his opening statements, and what ended up happening is Microsoft got stuck in years of litigation that Gates later acknowledged probably allowed, at the time, if people remember back in 2000, Microsoft was the dominant technology company. And Gates later acknowledged that it probably allowed Apple and other competitors, Google, to get a jump on Microsoft and get ahead in some circumstances in the market, particularly with the iPhone and the Android phone. And in one interview, Gates had said that had they acted differently during that case and put the focus back on his business, on Microsoft business, and been more conciliatory and willing to work with the government instead of taking a hardline approach, that they may have developed their own phone and they'd be in competition. Microsoft did try to do a phone, but it didn't really work. So you've got the two. This was all a gain frame. Microsoft initially had approached these negotiations as something that could be won, and they ended up paying a price for that. In the second case, this is where the process was so punishing in the Microsoft case that it really ended up being, even though they ended up getting something worked out, Microsoft didn't get totally broken up, it cost them a ton in business strategy. In the second case, this is where the European Union came after them, and this was a little bit later, 2003 or 2004 rather, and this went on for several years. In this case, Microsoft took a position that they were much more willing to work with the European Union to come up with options that would be acceptable. This gave rise to browser choice when you went into a Microsoft product. They looked at this more from the history and understanding, not from what they were going to win in the first case, but understanding from the first case how much it cost them. They looked at it from a loss perspective. What they were doing, these two cases are prime examples of the application of a BATNA, best alternative. We can win. We don't have to settle with you, from a gain frame to a loss frame. We realize what this is going to cost. We realize that it's not only going to cost us money, and I saw some numbers that suggested that Microsoft spent hundreds of millions of dollars in legal fees the first time around. They lost out on a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar cell phone market and other business that they could have potentially picked up by having so many resources dedicated to trying to win a case against the federal government, and it did not work out. In the second case for the European Union, Microsoft ultimately paid fines and they made significant concessions, but Gates later acknowledged that that was a better alternative because it allowed them to get back to the focus on their business. It was a rational escape. It allowed everybody to walk away from that without feeling like they needed to burn every bridge in the process. Here's another more recent example. I don't do a lot of family stuff, but this is in the news. the Brad Pitt Angelina divorce and the Depp Heard trial that everybody was talking about. I had friends ask me about Depp Heard. I ended up catching myself watching some of it. Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie went into a private mediation, realized that the cost that this was going to have. If you're ever involved in a negotiation, by the way, with people they start talking about their kids. That is like gold in an intense negotiation. People don't want to lose time. They don't want to have a risk that something's going to affect them or their ability to take care of their family or spend time with them. And Pitt and Jolie, they realized this. They went into a private mediation, were able to come up with something without making a public spectacle and save their family. They looked at it from a perspective of, what are all the things we stand to lose if this becomes public, just through the process itself, where, of course, anybody who watched any of that Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, that was all about, especially from one perspective, I won't pick one side or the other, but a lot of people looked at that as like it was a grab for who was going to do better, who was going to win. Or was one side's lawyers going to be better than the other? Was one side going to get more money than the other? Was one side going to look better in the public eye? It was, who was going to come out of that smelling better? And ultimately, the results of Depp Heard is that they both suffered. Their reputations for both of them, especially probably Amber Heard. I don't know. I'm not much of I don't follow a lot of celebrity types, but I don't think we ever hear anything anymore. So there's another example of loss framing versus gain framing. Looking early, like Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. Hey, what's the toll this is going to have in the long run, and how do we avoid that? Versus, hey, how can I win this? All right, so we're going to move into part 5, conclusion. I'm going to tie this all back together. So first thing you want to do, talk about this early in our presentation today. Figure out what kind of negotiation you're in. If you're in a transactional negotiation, if you're buying a car, buying a boat, buying an RV, BATNA applies just fine. If you're in some type of entangled situation, think of what the other side, what can your counterpart realistically expect to suffer or lose through the process? And oftentimes that involves a lot of the process itself. Shift the frame. Practice this at home with your kids, with your family, with friends, in simple discussions. You want to get something. Don't talk about how great a vacation is going to be. Talk about missing out on vacation because you don't make a decision soon. In legal disputes, the process is often the enemy. And so through questions of what's this going to cost? What's the toll this is going to have? What's this going to feel like emotionally? What amount of time? How are you going to tell your kids that you're going to miss out on these days, that you're going to be gone, that you're going to miss functions at school? How are you going to explain all this? How are you going to tell your team? How are you going to keep your folks motivated if you're in this knockdown, drag out lawsuit forever? How do you keep employees motivated for the company when they get deposed and they hear all kinds of negative things? Make the process the enemy in these processes. And then once you paint that negative picture, once you show people the edge of the cliff, now you're going to build the bridge and bring them back across, give them a way out and a way that they can save face, a way that they can exit the process with dignity. I have time for some questions. If we don't get questions, I'm looking on the question board here. Certainly we can touch on, I wanted to make sure that we have time to hit all of the issues. I think we're right about at one, but just to make sure everybody gets the CLE credit, let's take a couple of my favorite countermeasures. So if you look on one of the slides I hand you is countering hardball tactics. So one of these is looking, take it or leave it offer, right? You get something that's a final offer. And, if you hear something like that and somebody tells you, well, this is our deal, we're not willing to go lower. One response you might have like that is to put a label on it. It sounds like you've put a lot of thought into that position. What makes that, how did you come up with that? And how do we move forward if it doesn't work? If somebody says no to your low ball offer or whatever it is, how do we move off of that? How do you expect the other side to respond? So these are simple ways you can respond. Looking at, like we talked about, extreme anchoring. Another one is the good cop, bad cop. I've been involved in those before. You see these, a lot of folks, if you negotiate, if you're a lawyer, you see these a lot. You get one attorney who's the nice one and the other one who's, kind of jerky. You can call it out slightly. You can say, hey, one way is to say, hey, this looks like the good cop, bad cop. I've done that. This looks like good cop, bad cop. Another is, hey, I'm getting two different perspectives. It seems like one of you here is on this wavelength and want to use on this page, who should I be responding to? Who's making the decisions? Do you guys need a few minutes? Seems like you guys are in disagreement. Seems like you guys even recognize that there's a problem here on reconciling your position. How do we move forward with that? That's another tactic that you can use. There's some others on here, personal attacks. I like these. There's another notion I talked about, maintaining your zen, going to the balcony. Somebody attacks you personally, take a deep breath. Even if you need to get up and walk away, there's a metaphor of going to the balcony. Fisher and Urey talk about this in their books from the Harvard negotiation study. The metaphor of going to the balcony can apply both physically, walking outside. In my view, stepping outside into fresh air is a great way to reframe your perspective and prepare for going back into a tense situation. Nibbling is another one. You get a deal, and then somebody wants one more thing, and somebody wants one more thing. That's a great place for labeling that and calling it out, and for expected reciprocity. Okay, we'll give you that, but there is one more thing that we want. That's the response that I like. Okay, if we give you that, would you be willing to do this? If we make that concession, if we make that, we have a deal, but if we make that one more concession, there is something else we would like. And would you be willing to do that? Because then maybe we can put it together. That's an easy way to shut that down. Somebody asks for one more thing, let them know they've got to give up. I get that in mediations a lot too. People will have a deal and somebody say, do you think they'll do this? And my response to that is one of two things. One is there something else that we can trade for? Once we have a deal, even though in mediations, generally you don't have a deal until it's signed. Yesterday I had something wrapped up, very tense situation. I could tell everybody wanted to get it settled. I also use commitment and consistency, by the way. I'll start a mediation, say, hey, do you want to get your case settled today? And I'll start off with, you want to try and get this settled? Later I'll say, hey, okay, earlier you said you want to get it. Seems like you don't want to do that. You still want to stay with it. You want to stay consistent with your earlier position. And if they try to change the deal through nibbling or something else after the fact, one is ask for a concession in return. If I go over and ask for that, is there something else you want to do? The other is just, I'll tell people as a third party, as a mediator, if you want me to go over with that, I'll do it. But what if it takes the deal apart? Is it worth risking the deal falling apart for me to do it unless I can give up something else? Yesterday, I had that situation and the party said, no, we don't want to lose the deal. Forget it. We'll live with it. Looks like we're a little after 1 o'clock. I don't see any questions that have popped up. I'm happy to field them. The refresh button here one more time. And with no questions, we're over 60 minutes. I appreciate the opportunity to join you folks today. And if you have any questions and you haven't reached, my contact information there is on the screen. You can shoot me an email, phone call. I welcome if you're in Central Florida. Let's connect and have a great rest of your day.